Hi everyone, my name is Precious Anthony. Welcome to IGCSE Biology hosted by National Tutors. I am going to be taking you in IGCSE Biology over a series of video classes. So this will not be a live course, however, you will be going through the entire curriculum from these pre-recorded classes. And I'm just going to share my screen now and go over some of the topics that we will be talking about throughout the duration of this course. So this is our little screen of work here. It's not so little. There's the nature and variety of living organisms. We're going to be going over the characteristics of living things and the different types of living things and their differentiations. We're going to talk about the structures and the functions of living things. We're going to go into reproduction and inheritance. You're going to learn a lot about mitosis and genetics. Then we're going to go into ecology and the ecosystem and the environment, and then the use of biological resources. So these are the major topics that we will be covering throughout the duration of this course. All right, so from my first slide, just to again introduce myself again, my name is Precious Anthony, and I will be your tutor for the duration of this course. So I just want to point out that my email is precious@nationaltutors.co.uk. I know this isn't a live course, which is a little different, but I really do want to stay engaged with all of you. I want you guys to feel supported. I want your questions to be answered as much as possible. So please send me an email should you have any questions or concerns or worries. Send those to me. As far as this course is concerned, I'm going to make it a point of duty to dedicate at least 2 days of the week to really sit to go through emails. So I know for now, like the weekends would be a great time for that. So if you do send an email during the weekday, don't fret. I will get to it. I'll try to pick another weekday. I do believe Tuesdays as well, but I'm going to dedicate some days to just sit and go through your emails. So please send me emails. I'm going to get to your emails eventually and let me know. And then some pictures over here just to show you some of the material I'm using to support this course. There is the edXL International GCSE Biology. There's the student handbook, which is the one with the pretty penguins over here. And then you have the revision guide. So I do recommend that you guys try to get some of these materials and get any other type of textbook or material that you feel supports your learning as far as this exam is concerned. We're also going to be going over some past papers, doing some activity in class. So even though it's not live, it's still going to be as interactive as possible. There'll be times where I display some questions or activities, and I give you guys a minute to work on it yourself before going over it, so that you can also try to keep up and see how much you remember from what is taught and how much you actually know. All right, so again, don't forget, don't be afraid to send me an email, send me questions, whatever it is that you need assistance with, I'm happy to do so, okay? All right, so without any further ado, we're gonna go right into our first topic, which is the characteristics of living organisms, which is very fitting because this is biology, which is the study of life. So it only makes sense that we try to figure out what life is or what a living thing is in the first place. What are these things that we're going to be reviewing? So let's talk about these. All right, so before we get into it, I'd just like to display this slide and ask you guys a little fun question and say, do you feel like any living thing, or if I were to ask it this way, what does a living thing have in common with the car? All right, and what does a living thing have in common with the thermostat, which is this picture over here? All right, so just mull that over in your mind and ask yourself, does a living thing have anything in common with a car and a thermostat? Something worth thinking about. All right, so let's get right into it. The goal of this particular topic is for you to be able to identify what specific characteristics or features make up are seen in living things. Basically, how do you identify a living organism from a non-living thing, right? So just right off the bat, there are 8 specific characteristics that have to be present for you to be able to qualify anything as a living thing. All right, they have to be able to have these 8 characteristics, otherwise they won't be considered to be a living organism, right? This is pretty interesting because some of it seems very obvious, but when you start to deal with certain types of organisms that seem living but are not, you're going to want to refer back to these 8 characteristics. One of those organisms is a virus. All right, we'll talk more about virus as we go further along. But viruses are very interesting organisms, but they're not qualified as living things. And part of that is because, or really the major reason why that is because they do not showcase most of these characteristics. So they don't count as a living thing. Though they're not entirely non-living, they're not living. All right, so these are the 8 characteristics. We have movement, respiration, sensitivity, homeostasis, growth, reproduction, excretion, and nutrition. All right. Of course, one of the easiest ways to remember things is with the help of mnemonics. Okay, so the mnemonic that helps you with this particular characteristics of living things is Mrs. H. Gren. All right, so practice that. That's something that you can easily remember, Mrs. H. Gren, and that way you can remember all the characteristics that you need to. All right, so let's identify these one after the other and talk about them. Start with movement. Movement sounds like what it is, right? It's the ability of an organism to move. Okay, so all living things have to be able to move, whether that's a very overt and large scale movement or just something more small and maybe less noticeable. But all living things are able to move, and they need to move because movement helps a living thing to survive. In movement, living things can get to their food, right? So that they can have a source of have a meal and have a source of nutrition so that they can continue to grow. In movements, living things can also escape dangers in their environment. So movement is very key for every living thing. So when you think about living things, I imagine most people imagine humans, right? Animals, plants. And of course, all of these have to move one way or the other. With animals and humans, it's very obvious when you watch your dog move from one corner of the room to the other. You take your dog on a walk. When you yourself walk to the fridge, walk to the kitchen, walk out of your house, those are very obvious movements. But plants can also move, right? Plants do move, especially when they are trying to respond to certain things going on in their environment. And if you want to test this theory, you can always plant a seed, right? So you plant a seed in a pot and keep it somewhere that's a little shaded from light. All right, what you're going to see is as this plant is germinating and growing, it's going to try to grow in the direction of light. Whatever little source of light you have in that room, that plant is going to grow in that direction. And the reason why is because it needs light to be able to make food. So as a living thing, it has the ability to move towards what it needs, okay? And that's pretty much the idea for all living things. So all living things have to be able to move. So it's written here that many animals will chase their prey, right? And other animals will run away from the other animals that are chasing it. And of course, plants can move in response to sunlight. Plants also grow their roots, right? So they grow their roots downward to anchor the plant and to also allow the plant to obtain nutrients from the soil. So one way or the other, movement is happening. But it doesn't always have to be on a large scale type of organism. Even the smaller organisms that you can't really see, like bacteria, they move as well. They have to move from one part to another, again, to engage in whatever activities that they're going through. All right. Okay, so fun fact for you here, the cheetah is the world's fastest land mammal and apparently can reach speeds of up to 70 miles per hour, which is truly something. All right, so we're seeing the cheetah move to chase down its prey. If it's not able to chase its prey, then it won't be able to eat and survive. Okay, this is a plant moving towards a light source so that it can have its source of energy through photosynthesis. All right, that brings us to R in Mrs. H. Grant. So R stands for respiration. Now, when many people think about respiration, they always think about breathing in and breathing out, right? Take a breath, and that's respiration. And that is maybe the most superficial way you can think about it, because that's only a part of what respiration really is. Respiration is a process by which food products are broken down to release energy. That's really what respiration is. It's the process by which energy is brought out of whatever source of food a living thing has, ingested or taken in. So respiration is a pretty major chemical process that happens so that energy can be available for living things. And when you think about it, all living things need energy, right? You need energy to move, to do work, to do whatever it is that you're doing. And that's not just you as a human being, but every living thing also needs energy to carry out their basic metabolic processes. And Respiration is the way by which that happens, okay? So we're going through all of those now. It says here that the energy is used for a variety of life processes, and these are all the things: excretion, reproduction. You need energy for those things, and energy comes from respiration. So there are two major types of respiration that are very important for you to know. There is aerobic, and then there is anaerobic respiration. Okay, the major thing for you to think about when you think about the types of respiration is oxygen. Okay, aerobic respiration is a type of respiration that happens in the presence of oxygen, and anaerobic respiration is the type of respiration that happens when there is no presence of oxygen, all right, so in the absence of oxygen. So this is the equation for aerobic respiration. Essentially, oxygen will react with glucose. Now remember, we said that respiration is the process by which food is broken down to release energy. That food in this case is represented by glucose, which is a byproduct of your food, right? After your food is digested, glucose is one of the products that is brought out of your food. So this is oxygen reacting with glucose to produce carbon dioxide, which is a very important byproduct of metabolism, water, right, and energy, which is really your goal. Okay, so this is how aerobic respiration happens, and this particular reaction is a very important one for you to try to remember. Okay. All right, so chemically, this is how it looks like. So this notation is probably not the best way. So let's write it out in a more, in a proper way, the way it would actually look. So this is what it looks like. So glucose, which is represented by C6, our little c, C6, H12. This is our glucose molecule. O6 is going to react with oxygen. Now, if you guys remember anything from chemistry, you balance reactions, and that's why you have a 6 there, so that everything is balanced. But you're reacting with oxygen, or it's reacting with oxygen, and you're going to end up having some carbon dioxide, 6 CO2, and water. Okay, so carbon dioxide is given off as a byproduct of respiration, and water also. Of course, the last major thing is energy. This is really your goal here. Energy is what we're trying to access from breaking down food products. Okay. All right. So this is what happens. Now, to really get more in depth into this, the reason why breathing is sometimes considered to be respiration by people is because breathing is an important part of aerobic respiration, right? The oxygen that is reacted with glucose has to come in by respiring or by breathing in. So you breathe in oxygen, it's going to react with glucose, and then energy is going to come out of that, water is going to come out of that, and carbon dioxide, which is CO2. Now that carbon dioxide, you exhale that, right? That's the breath that you let go of. So this is kind of why people think breathing is respiration. But again, now we know respiration is a deeper process than that. It's really the ability to take energy out of food. And breathing only helps with that, especially when it's aerobic. Now, the thing to know about aerobic respiration, I mean, all types of respiration really, is that the source of energy in the body is known as ATP. All right, so as biologists, we all need to know this. This is adenosine triphosphate. Essentially, there is a molecule, a biological molecule called adenosine. All right, and adenosine normally is attached to 2 phosphate molecules. Okay, so this is adenosine, and adenosine is usually attached to 2 phosphate molecules. Okay, so you want to think of adenosine as the body's power bank. Really, what happens is that when you're breaking down food, you're going to cause a reaction to happen. All this energy that comes from your food, because remember, energy is stored in molecules. In your food molecules, you have a type of energy called chemical energy. As you're breaking it down, that chemical energy is released, okay? When it's released, it allows for a 3rd phosphate. So remember, we start off with adenosine and 2 phosphates. We call that ADP, adenosine diphosphate, okay? Now, the energy we get out of food is going to help attach a 3rd phosphate to this adenosine molecule to form ATP. This ATP now represents our power bank for the body. Whenever the body needs some type of energy to do some type of reaction, it's going to come to ATP. It's going to release that phosphate molecule that was attached, and in the process of that, it's going to release the energy. So again, the energy that's gotten from food is used to attach a phosphate molecule to ADP. All right, this used to be adenosine and 2-phosphates. When you attach that molecule, it's like you're storing that energy in ADP, which is now ATP, because they're 3-phosphates. Whenever you need to access that energy, you're just going to pull out the 3rd phosphate that you put in the first place, and that's going to release energy. All right, that's pretty much the reaction that's happening here. And again, it's the way of the body accessing that energy from your food. All right, so that's the gist of your aerobic respiration. Let's talk anaerobic respiration. Now, sometimes living things don't have access to oxygen, and this can happen for a bunch of reasons. So whenever they don't have access to oxygen, they still need to have access to energy. And if that's the case, there has to be another way to get energy out of food that doesn't involve oxygen. That process is called anaerobic respiration. So when does this happen? Well, there's some living things like bacteria and fungi that find themselves in environments that don't have a lot of oxygen. Now, usually as a human being, you tend to hopefully always be in an environment that has oxygen. But sometimes there are certain cells in your body that may not be able to access that oxygen as quickly as they need to do their work. A good example of a cell like that is muscles, or the cells of your muscles, okay? Now, when you're running really quickly, right, out of the blue, you just start sprinting really quickly. What happens is that sometimes the amount of work that you're doing, or the amount of work that your muscle is doing, is greater than the amount of oxygen that is getting to your muscles at the time. You notice that when you start running, you start breathing a little more quickly because your body is trying to give you all the oxygen you need to get you moving as quickly as you currently are. But sometimes you don't have a great balance where even though you're breathing in a ton of oxygen, that oxygen is either not enough or is not getting to your muscles as quickly as it needs to for the speed and the work that your muscles are doing. So what happens? Well, we don't want your muscles to break down, right? So what will happen is your muscles will start to engage in anaerobic respiration. So it's still able to access energy. It's just, it doesn't have oxygen. So it's going to find another way to get energy so it can keep moving, okay? Now, anaerobic respiration is the process by which energy is accessed from food without oxygen. The thing you need to know about this is you cannot access all the energy that is stored in your food without oxygen. You just can't. So you end up accessing a little less energy during anaerobic respiration than you do during aerobic respiration. I mean, it should be enough to sustain you for that period of time, but it's always going to be less than the type of energy that this living thing would have been able to harness if it was respiring aerobically. I hope that makes sense. So it's an incomplete breakdown of glucose / food to get energy. So the food is not completely broken down because oxygen is required for that, but you still are able to access some amount of energy, all right? So let's look at the chemical reaction that is involved in anaerobic respiration. We're going to split this into something that happens in yeast, right? And yeast is a type of fungi, which we will talk about, versus something that happens in your muscles. All right, so this is yeast. So yeast is going to start to break down glucose. Remember, there's no oxygen, so it's just going to take the food, break it down, and what that's going to produce is ethanol, which is a type of alcohol, carbon dioxide, which is usually a waste product of metabolism, and energy. So it's able to get energy. It's just not going to get as much energy as it would have if there was oxygen, okay? Now, yeast is something we use in baking. So anybody who's an experienced or an interested baker should know a little bit about yeast, all right? That carbon dioxide builds up in your dough and helps it to rise, right? So you can make breads and puff pastries and all of that, okay? Now, anaerobic respiration in muscles is a little different. We're still breaking down glucose without the help of oxygen, but instead we're producing something called lactic acid. So lactic acid is what is produced and builds up in the muscles, in addition to carbon dioxide that you give off and the energy that these muscles need. Try to remember the energy is a little less than it would have been if you were aerobically respiring. The other thing you need to know is lactic acid can eventually be fully broken down into even more energy, right? Or converted into other products, but you're going to need oxygen to fully break it down, all right? And so the oxygen that is required to fully break down this lactic acid is sometimes referred to as oxygen debt. It's like the oxygen that you still need to finish this process, so oxygen debt. So in case that ever comes up, you should hopefully know what that means, okay? All right, so try to remember these reactions. They are important so you can tell the difference between an aerobic respiration reaction and an anaerobic one. Right. So it says your respiration releases energy, which is used for a variety of other metabolic processes. So the energy you get from respiration powers everything else that needs to happen for living things. All right, the next characteristic is sensitivity. All right, so what is sensitivity? Sensitivity is the ability of a living thing to respond to any change in its environment. The idea is anything that's alive should be able to sense the environment around it, right? It should be able to respond to different things, whether that's noise, a change in temperature, taste, whatever it is, right? You should be able to respond to a change in your environment. Now, these changes in the environment are called stimuli. So basically, we're saying that all living things can respond to stimuli, all right? So living things are able to detect things that happen in their environment or changes that happen in their environment or stimuli. They do this with the help of these special cells called receptors. And so there are all kinds of receptors in your body, right, as a living thing and every other living thing. There are receptors that can respond to pressure. So meaning if you're minding your business and doing your thing and somebody just pinches you, you're going to jump, I imagine, right? That's because you have these receptors in your skin that can respond to pressure. They can tell that something is, pinching me, right? You have receptors that are for other things as well that can respond to smells, that can respond to temperature. All of these receptors help a living thing to be able to tell when something is different in their environment. If you sit in a place and somebody starts to boil water where you are in an enclosed space, you're going to start to feel hot at some point. And maybe if you weren't paying attention, that's going to make you look up and look around and think, why is it hotter than it used to be? And then you're going to notice the stove in the corner, I imagine. So it's necessary for living things to be in tune with their environment because sometimes that's really what saves a living thing. Imagine if a forest fire starts, right? The hope is that the animals in the forest will start to sense that change in heat and will hopefully get away from that heat, right? So sensitivity is very necessary for all living things, okay? Now, sensitivity isn't always as simple as, okay, we have a fire, let's run. Sometimes it's, it regulates other things. Like, for example, we say plants may lose their leaves when the weather gets colder. So plants can sense changes in season. And that's why you have seasons where plants are blooming, like spring. And you have seasons where plants have their leaves turn orange, like autumn or fall, right? And you have seasons where some trees just completely lose their plants, like winter. All how do these plants know, right? They can sense the change in temperature. Okay. All right. And then animals too can sense that the temperature is changing. We're either going to leave or find somewhere to hunker down. So you have animals that undergo hibernation where they go to sleep for the months that are cold. Then they must have known it was coming on by the change in temperature. So they sensed that and they knew it's time for us to go to sleep. Right? There are other animals that migrate, that leave the area, like some birds who move from one area to another just because the temperatures change. All of these are things that they sense. So sensitivity, with the help of receptors, is a very essential characteristic of a living thing. All right, that brings us to homeostasis. All right, so homeostasis, which is a fancy word, just means the ability to regulate. All right, all living things have to be able to regulate their internal system. Okay, so what is the importance of regulating your internal system? Everything that happens inside a living thing has to be controlled, right? Because a living thing has to work in a certain way, okay? Because when you think about it, your body and all living things are made up of a bunch of things. And one of these things is enzymes. Enzymes are these proteins that help regulate metabolic reactions. They help speed up reactions. And the enzymes in your body are very sensitive. They can sense temperature, they can sense acidity, and so they only work under certain environments or certain circumstances. That means that your body has to constantly make sure that everything internally is working the way it's supposed to, or the environment, your internal environment is set at the place or at the level it's supposed to be for everything inside of you to work properly. Okay, so your body is able to do things like regulate your temperature, right? Or try to regulate your acid balance, so your acid base balance, just to make sure that everything continues to work the way it's supposed to be. Okay, so it says here that it is the ability to regulate the internal conditions of the body, right? Normally, when a body senses a change in its environment, its response is to try to regulate the internal environment to keep the body working as it's supposed to. So it says here, animals have a nervous system and a hormonal system which allows for coordinated responses. So your nerves help to sense things, and then your body sometimes tries to regulate with the help of hormones. I'm going to give an example. When it gets really, really hot, right, and your body temperature starts to rise, your nerve is going to sense, or your nerves are going to sense this, and then they're going to communicate to different organs in your body that are going to do things like change your body temperature. What is the way in which your body temperature can be changed? Well, you're going to start sweating. Process of sweating helps cool you down, right? And that's to make sure that your body temperature does not rise to such a degree that it starts to destroy things in your body. That's homeostasis, the process whereby your body tries to turn things around to bring things back to normal, okay? So plants also do this as well, and all living things do. Plants have these hormone-like chemicals which help regulate what is going on in the environment. So homeostasis is necessary because the system of your body has to remain at a certain constant. Your body can only really thrive at a certain temperature range. Your body can only thrive at a certain acid-base balance, and it's always trying to bring you back to normal so things continue to work, okay? All right, so it says here many hormones that are important for homeostasis are produced in glands found in the brain. Very true. Okay, now growth. What is growth? It's the ability to grow. But on a cellular level, growth can mean many things. Sometimes growth means the ability to increase the number of cells. Sometimes growth means the ability to increase the size of cells. Sometimes growth means the ability to increase the complexity of cells, okay? But the idea is that all living things should be able to grow. All living things have to be able to develop from one phase to another. So let's think of it in terms of humans. Everyone comes in as a baby, right? You move from a baby to toddler stage. From that, you go into pre-adolescence, then you're an adolescent, and then eventually you're an adult. Then you're older, and so on and so forth, right? And then you have plants. Plants start as seeds, most of them, right? And then the seeds will germinate into these tiny little plants that can eventually continue to grow to whatever full plants, the most adult form of that plant, whether it's a huge tree or just a nice bush, whatever it is. So all living things have the ability to grow from one stage to another. There should be the ability to grow, okay? Now, growth is important because it increases the likelihood of survival, and that's true. Try to think about that in the human and animal context, right? A little baby cub has a less chance of survival in the wild like an adult. Most baby cubs are protected by their adult mothers because on their own, they're not really able to run from predators or chase down their prey or do all the things that they need to do to survive. But as they grow, they develop the ability to do so. Same thing as humans, right? As a child, there's so much that you're not able to do to take care of yourself. But as you grow, you start to increase your ability to survive. Okay, so growth is very, very important in all living things. This is a nice little animation of a growing plant. So you can see a plant starts obviously from a seed and then into little form and then continues to grow. All right, reproduction. We're still doing Mrs. H. Gren. So we've done the G. This is the next R, which is reproduction. All living things have the ability to reproduce. What does it mean to reproduce? It's to produce an offspring or a new version or a different, well, let's put it at offspring. I don't want to say new version, but an offspring of yourself or of a living thing. That is reproduction. Now, living things are reproduce either sexually or asexually, all right? The idea is that with sexual reproduction, you have the fusion or the coming together of the male sex or the male sexual organ with the female sexual organ to produce a zygote or a fetus or a new living thing, as opposed to asexual reproduction where it is really just one living thing, not fusing with another one, but just one living thing that can produce a new living thing from a part of itself. So it has nothing to do with germ cells. We're not talking about eggs versus sperm or male reproductive parts versus female reproductive part. We're just talking about a living thing that a fragment of itself or a portion of itself can break off to form another living thing. You see this a lot in some plants and in fungi. So literally, there's some fungi that a part of its body or a part of itself would break off, and that will become a new fungi. That would be asexual reproduction. Okay. So it says here that plants, for example, can use pollination or self-fertilization to produce offspring. This would be sexual because in pollination, you're taking the pollen, which comes from the male parts of the plant, and you're going to put it into the female parts of the plant, and then it's going to form the fruits, which would be the offspring, and with the seeds in it, which would be the offspring. It's the seeds that are the offspring. But the point of reproduction is to maintain the existence of a living thing. Because think about it, any living thing that cannot reproduce will eventually die off, right? The beauty of reproduction means that as new living things are coming from the old, that particular living thing will always be represented in the ecosystem. So polar bears, as they have new babies or new polar bears, right, it means that the generations to come will hopefully get to see polar bears, because every living thing we're seeing now, including ourselves, came from an older living thing or living thing that came before, right? So if that living thing that came before us was not able to produce us, then we would not be here. So reproduction is necessary for the survival of a species. It's the only way that a species can continue to exist in the environment, okay? All right, so reproduction is not just limited to the obvious living things that you may think about on a daily basis, but bacteria, which is also a living thing, has its own special way of reproducing. Bacteria will literally split in half, and those halves will become, or those halves will become new bacteria. That process is known as binary fission. So this is a bacteria that is splitting in half to form two new bacteria. All right, that brings us to excretion. So excretion is the process by which a living thing lets go of waste product. So we talked a little bit about metabolism when we spoke about respiration and how respiration helps you break down food to release energy. Well, that's only one type of metabolism. There's a lot of processes that are going on in your body and in every living thing. And in the process of making things, you end up having waste products. For example, the waste product of respiration is carbon dioxide or CO2 that needs to be taken out. But there are a lot of waste products that come from just being a living thing, from all the different chemical processes that are happening inside. And so those things need to be taken out of the body so they don't build up and make the body sick. Okay. All right. So both plants and animals have different ways with which they excrete. All right. So one major organ of excretion in animals is the kidneys. The kidneys are really, really cool organs because they have the ability to literally filter your blood and take out all the nasty stuff, all the toxins, all the unnecessary metabolites, all the excess water even. Take all of that out of your blood, return the clean blood back to you, right? And send all that waste product out of themselves in the form of urine. So that's a little fun fact for you, right? So urine is actually filtered blood, something for you to think about. So that's one major organ of excretion. You have other excretory organs in your body, right? For plants, one of the major organs of excretion is the stomata. The stomata refers to these little openings on the surfaces of your plant, specifically like the leaves, right? They're not the only ones that have it, but specifically, for example, the leaves. The leaves, they have these little openings that can allow for the removal of waste products. Okay, whether that's excess gas or excess liquid, they take it out through those little openings. All right, that brings us to nutrition. Nutrition is the ability to obtain nutrients or to obtain food from your environment so that you can then use the product of the breakdown of that food to grow. Obviously, all living things have to grow, which is what we spoke about. But to grow, you need to be able to have access to nutrients. Nutrients are what help to build up a living thing and allow it to grow. So therefore, all living things have to be able to have access to some form of nutrition, all right? Because it is from eating food. Obviously, this food is broken down through respiration, which we discussed. Then you have energy to do all the work that needs to be done. So without food in the first place, respiration won't happen, right? Growth won't happen, and a living thing won't be able to progress, okay? So animals derive energy from eating. Normally, animals tend to eat other things. So some animals eat plants and other animals eat other animals. The entire process of feeding on something else is called heterotrophy, right? This is a little different from plants that have the ability to produce their own food, right? Most plants, not all, but most plants are able to produce their food without needing to feed on another living thing. There are a couple of carnivorous plants, right, that literally feed on other living things to survive. However, most of the plants are able to make food on their own with the help of energy from the sun. That process of making your own food by yourself without needing to feed on another living thing is called autotrophy. Okay. The process by which plants create food from the sun using energy from the sun is called photosynthesis. So all of these are just processes under nutrition, which is just a way with which living things are able to gain nutrients from the environment. Okay. So you have these interesting diagrams that arise as a result of living things feeding on other living things, and they're called food webs or food chains, okay? So you can see some examples here. You see here there's a plant's going to get energy from the sun and nutrients from the soil, and it's going to grow. And then a grasshopper is going to feed on that plant. But then a frog can eat the grasshopper, and then a snake can eat the frog, and then a hawk can eat the snake, and so on and so forth. So you have these systems whereby living things depend on other living things most of the time for food, except plants, of course, that then depends on the energy of the sun. Okay, so for humans, obviously, you have different types of nutrition styles and nutrition choices, right? Some people are vegetarian, some are vegan, some eat all things, both plants and animals. Some are gosh, there are many specialized types of feeding mechanisms for humans now. But the point is that no matter what choice of meals that you have as a person, you should always try to make sure it's balanced because you want to obtain as much nutrients as you can from your food. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this topic. So we should hopefully remember the Mrs. H. Gren, right? M for movement, right? R for respiration, S for sensitivity, H for homeostasis, G for growth, R for reproduction, E for excretion, and N for nutrition. Hopefully that's something we can easily remember and just test ourselves on and remember all the characteristics that make up a living thing, okay? Now, a little activity for us. I want us to take, I'm going to make you like maybe 2-3 minutes to match these actions with the characteristic of living things that they represent, right? So we have a lion chasing down a gazelle. Which particular characteristic of a living thing is the lion exhibiting there? A dog panting on a hot day, and an earthworm backing away from the glare of a flashlight. So I'm going to give you guys maybe 2 to 3 minutes. If you have like a little piece of paper and you can just write down what you think. Which particular characteristic of a living thing are each of these living things exhibiting in these 3 situations? All right, so hopefully that's enough time. Let's see if we can figure out the answers to this. So, first one said a lion chasing a gazelle. I kind of hope we all realize that there's a lot of movement going on there, right? At the very least, right? So the lion is moving very quickly, but it's not the only thing, right? You got to have some level of respiration happening there because you need to break down glucose to have energy, or for the lion to have energy to be moving that quickly. Same thing with the gazelle. They're both moving, both respiring in their own way and trying to survive, right? The lion is trying to have some source of nutrition. The gazelle is trying to survive. All right, great. That brings us to a dog panting on a hot day. So I don't know if we all know this, but dogs do not have the ability to sweat. However, their temperature is going to rise if the temperature of the environment rises. So one of the ways with which their body temperature, stays at the level it's supposed to, or their bodies check their temperature, is by causing the dog to pant. So a dog pants even more than usual on a hot day, and that kind of allows it to cool off. And the process by which the body is responding to its environment and then regulating its internal temperature is homeostasis. All right. In a way, there's also response to stimuli there, right? Because the body could sense that change in heat. But it's also really homeostasis, where the body's trying to regulate the internal temperature back to normal. That brings us to the earthworms. So earthworms don't really like a lot of light. They tend to be in moist, damp, dark soil. That's how they do their thing. They tend to avoid too much sunlight. So if you shine a torch on an earthworm, it's going to sense it and try to inch away from it. That is sensitivity, right? Its ability to respond to stimulus, the stimulus being the glare of the flashlight. All right, so hopefully everybody was able to do that. I'm going to take us back to the first slide where we had that weird question and see if we can think about what our answer to this is. So what do living things have in common with a car and a thermostat? All right, so the hope is that we've come to learn, well, cars move. Most cars have to be moved, but now we're getting to the era where we have automated cars that can potentially move on their own. Either way, movement is something cars have in common with living things. Just really that mostly. And then thermostats. Thermostats have the ability to regulate the temperature of the environment. So that would be kind of similar to homeostasis. Okay. All right. But the idea is that these non-living things do not have the ability to perform all of Mrs. H. Grant, and so therefore they're not considered to be living things. Okay, guys, that will, be the end of this particular session. So for future sessions, we're going to have take-home activities so you guys can practice. For this particular topic, I would say your take-home activities to practice Mrs. H. Grant. Write it down, see if you can remember what each of those letters stand for and what they mean, okay? Other than that, enjoy the rest of your day. Please send me questions if you have any. Remember, it's precious at nationaltutors.co.uk. I will be looking forward to hearing from you all. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.